Today, an email from Devante about accountability, owning the outcomes you sell, Chapter 9 of the only sales guide you'll ever need. Devante writes, "Good morning, Anthony. In accountability, own the outcomes you sell, you talk about calling your client to make sure they're achieving the outcomes you promised. Absolutely. You sold the outcomes. You have to make sure they're delivered. Any suggestions on how to do that if my organization has account managers that typically do those check-ins and maintain the client relationship? I don't want to, quote, step on anyone's toes, period, end quote." Okay, so Devante, here's how to think about this. You sold the client, so you're responsible for generating the outcome. And that doesn't mean that you're responsible alone. It's great that you have account managers, or some businesses have client success managers, and you have a whole team of operators who execute and make sure that that promise that you made is delivered. But here's the thing. You still own the outcomes because you went and sold the client, and you're the one that helped discover their needs, and you're the one that presented the solution, and you're the one that collaborated with them, and you're the one that built consensus and asked them for the money, and you're the one that gave them the contract, and they signed that contract. They're working with you. In their mind, part of their purchase was Devante. So you came to them and said, buy from me and my company, buy our solution because we're better. We can achieve these outcomes better than anyone else. So they trusted you with their business, which means you now have a responsibility to make sure that they're generating the outcome. So let's separate your group and the operators that you work with, because these are two very separate roles. You're not the operator, which means you're not the one that takes care of the transactions. You're not the one that calls and does check-in calls, even though I don't like the word check-in calls. I like a call with an agenda and something driven to say, I want to verify our performance. I want to make sure that you know we've handled all your problems, and I want you to know we're thinking about what we do next together, which is different than a check-in call. You're not responsible for making all of those calls, and you're not responsible for many of the day-to-day interactions between your company and your client. But you still own the outcome. So even though some other group owns the transactions, you own the outcomes. And here's what I'd like you to think about. When you go back to sell them the next product or the next service or the next solution, or you go back to renew that contract, what you want is an absolute right to that next deal. And what I mean by that is you don't want it to be put up for bid. You don't want them to look at another person in your role. You don't want a competitor to come in and compete with you for that business. And to prevent that, you have to drive a wedge between your client and any competitive threat. And that means you have to be there and make sure that they're getting that outcome. Because if they know, I can trust Devante, I can trust him to be here, he'll always make sure that we're getting the result. If we're not, he'll go back and motivate his team and help us make changes on our end so that we always get the outcome that he promised. So this is what you do when you own the outcome. It doesn't mean that you're the one that does all of the work, and it doesn't mean that you're the one that owns the transactions. And I've seen salespeople immediately say, my client has a problem, so I'm going to shift into an operational role and I'm going to start doing this operational work for them. That's the wrong choice. The right choice is to make sure that you manage your team and you lead your team and you generate those results because you want to make sure that the client gets the outcome. And you might follow up with the client, but it's not your job to own the transactions. Do everything you can to help them, but let them own that. You own the outcomes. You earn the absolute right to the next deal because it's going to be your responsibility to go get that deal. I hope that makes sense for you here. I hope it brings you value. I'm Anthony Iannarino. This is Everyday. Hit the subscribe button below, and I'll see you tomorrow.